Hey, Frank, I was wondering, do you have a story about showing courage in a relationship?
Yeah, Brad, I think I have one. I think it's one where directness actually made a difference. So when I think about, I have a friend who works a normal corporate job, but who's really passionate about cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that her actual dream of what she would much rather like to do is run a restaurant or start one, but she has no idea about, things that have to do with running a business. And she said, I would actually have to learn a few things and go on a course and read book and get doing the motion, found a company to get started and so on. But unfortunately, she said, my job is so demanding. I'm working so many hours, I'm working late hours, I have a family I have to take care of. So this is why I can't. And I said to her, and to be honest, I don't really know why I said it this way, I said to her, I think everything you just told me is just a convenient excuse for you not to do it. And she was surprised, and I was surprised about myself as well. And with a little pause, she said, I think you're right. What I'm doing is I'm just prioritizing other things because I'm afraid of actually making the steps. It's not that I don't have the time, I don't allow myself to actually make time. That would be my one.
Did you think about being courageous before you were, or did it just come out that way? Like, were you conscious of it?
No, back then I was not. I just thought that it was the only thing that I could say that would make any difference. Mm. Because otherwise, I had the feeling that at that time she was so focused on, she would have a story and excuse for everything. But I liked her, she's a friend, so I wanted to help. And I thought the only way of doing this efficiently was, I instinctively thought I just had to be direct.
Yeah.
And it made a difference, Brett.
I call this one of the elements of what I call laser coaching, a quality that I think leaders can really adopt as leaders and managers to really get right to the point. I think that's a great story. And did she take up her cooking?
No, she did not yet. But I know the day will come. I think there are other things she has to work out for herself.
Right.
But it's going to go. It was just an important realization,
It's the first step. It's the first step, right?
Oh, realism is also important, though, of course. Yeah,
well, it kind of links. So I was working with a leader, actually a manager, who was telling me that they couldn't really get promoted beyond their level. So whenever an opportunity came up, they were overlooked. They weren't seen as a leader. And they then gave me like 6 different reasons why they were not being made into a senior leader. And it was because they're not seen as having empathy, and they're not very good at rapport building, and 99% of the time when people go out for a drink, they would rather go home. And the list was going on and on and on. And a bit like your story, right? When you hold a mirror up and you say, it sounds to me like that's just a convenience excuse. I kind of did the same thing. I said to him, what kind of story are you telling here? And he said to me, what do you mean, a story? I said, well, you've made this whole story of why you're not getting promoted, like you're some victim in this. Why don't we change the story? If you don't like the ending, change the story. Yeah. And in that moment, you could see, we sat there actually quietly for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It's quite a long time to sit in silence. And I would look down to not put him under pressure, I'd look up at him. And then he said, I play the victim and everyone else is the villain. Yeah. And I just said to him, that's your story. What do you want the story to be? And actually, we made a really good plan through the next like 15, 20 minutes of what he could do to build more rapport with people, how to do some networking at senior leadership meetings in his business, and still not betray his, you know, authentic self.
Yeah.
And it was a very powerful way. I think when you keep people out of their stories, you get them to focus on reality.
Yes.
And a lot of the time, people don't focus on the facts. They focus on the fiction.
Yeah. It's the stories. And you know what? So I think what's so super powerful is realizing that you get to choose the story that you're telling yourself. You can rewrite it, don't you?
All the time, I think in coaching interactions I have, people tell themselves a story. We're all telling ourselves stories all day long, right? From
Sure.
the moment we get up of what our day's going to look like. I was telling myself a story on Wednesday. I was looking at my schedule on Thursday and I was thinking, oh, it's going to be such a tough day. And I've got this many meetings or this workshop. And then there's a voice in my head goes, what story are you telling yourself? Okay, if you keep saying it's going to be a tough day, it's going to be a tough day.
Right.
And we've talked about this before on another Real Talk, right? What you focus on grows.
Yeah, that's related.
Right? And actually in both stories, in your courage story too, right? If your friend constantly focuses on what they can't do and why they can't do it, then that grows and grows and grows and becomes the reality. Just as my guy in my story, the more he was looking out at the leaders who were overlooking him, it was as if they were doing it to him deliberately. Like,
yeah. Actually, you have that a lot, don't you? That because it's very convenient for many people to think that everything that happens to them or seems to happen to them is actually is caused by someone else's behavior or perception of you, or whatever it is, but it is external somehow. And it is so convenient because you'll find the moment you believe that, you will continue to find proof that that's true.
Yes,
which actually makes you go deeper into the story.
Right. You'll look for that. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because even when you say that, what it reinforces for me is that anything anybody says about me actually has very little to do with me. It's to do with their story.
Yeah.
And how I play out in their story.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Frank,
exactly.
Maybe we've got this world of human beings who are all walking around telling ourselves a story. But you see it, don't you, with what's happened with COVID-19? The narrative and the story that the press tell, the narrative and the story that the governments tell, and now the narrative and the story of the world's population and how they then act because of their story. From the sublime to the ridiculous.
This entire rainbow range.
Right. So people who don't want to go outside because they're frightened they're going to die the minute they walk out the door. And people who want to go on marches to say this is the government's way of controlling us. How are we allowing it to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing, I believe, because what other people say or think about you is based on their perception of the reality, the stories that they're telling them. So you fit into their picture in some particular way, and then they're going to give that back to you. At the same time, you know that you are telling yourself your own story about things, and you have the ability to rewrite it. And I think this dynamic somehow, actually, to be honest, I think it actually obliges you to revisit the stories that you tell about yourself from time to time, not give too much weight about what you hear or see from the external world. Some, because they're important indicators, how you fit into the world of everybody else, and that can work for or against you. So it's important to know. But with regards to finding your own way, getting, progressing in what you would like to do, achieving the things that you want, you have an obligation to write your own story and to revisit it.
I know you're right. But in your story, you highlight the courage required to not just choose your own path, but to take the first steps onto your own path.
Yeah, that requires courage for sure. But you can help. If you're, let's go back to the situation of you being a leader in a corporation, and the people that are on your team, you want to help them. And one of the things that are super important if you do this efficiently is you need to inspire them to have the courage to do things. So I think you can be of a great help there. This both grounding them in a realism, also having the courage for yourself, but also inspiring the courage in the other to look at things in a very pragmatic way, and then encouraging them to make the first steps. That is super, super important. Let me just add one thing. I think, as I said earlier, as you believe something, you look out for proof. You will always find proof once you look out for it, so you go deeper into your story. So how do you change that? Is you need to probably have some help, and somebody who also can believe a different story about you, who encourages you to take a first baby step into some direction. This will give you an experience. Probably it's going to be a good experience, so you have more reason to watch out for more proof that you could actually do it. Isn't it like that?
And the psychology behind it, of course, is our brain will focus on things that we give it attention. In a simple form, right? Let's say I bought a new car today, a blue BMW for sake of argument. How many blue BMWs do you think I would see when I went onto the road driving today?
It will be the only cars that are driving on the road. I know the phenomenon.
So this principle of what we focus on, we see, and therefore we draw more of it into us, I think is really important. And it's true, you watch an advert on the television about a safari in Africa, and then when you're walking down the high street, every advert you see will, have an elephant on it and come to safari, or you'll get pop-ups on your windows online. And I think this idea of courage and realism as a leader, it's like a super skill we have, that we have the opportunity to help people not just take that first step, but actually maybe even to a bigger degree, help them plan it. Think about people who have limiting beliefs, for example. They perhaps want to grow into a people manager role. They're not seen as one maybe by senior leaders, so they're not being given the opportunity. If we're able to help them with the planning, so not just the courage to do it, but the steps to do it, the practical side of doing it, I think then we enable people to really start owning their development. And that for me is massive, because when people start to take responsibility, you get much more tangible outputs and tangible outcomes. When they're still in their story, and it's very easy to slip back into the story, I think what you're doing there is you're pushing the responsibility away. When you live in your story, you don't have to take responsibility for anything.
Yeah, it's beautiful how that's related to the things that we've been talking about earlier. This responsibility piece. It's true that when you have people who have dreams and aspirations, they're not always ready for it, because they're still in some sort of story that, the circumstances or people around them don't allow them to progress. Right. Or they feel entitled, that they're thinking, I'm here since 5 years, I should have, and so on. But it's always something external. And the moment you can encourage someone to, first of all, to see that they need to own it, they need to take responsibility for their career, for how they feel, how they see themselves, that is a huge fundament to even, find the courage, for example, to doing things. You need to be responsible for it. I would actually start there. I think probably most of the time I would like to start there, to figure out are you already taking responsibility for your feelings and actions and the image of how you see yourself?
Right, because when we take that thought, feeling, actions, if people are focusing all of that on other people, then clearly they're in both denial and lack of responsibility. Before we develop that though, it's interesting, isn't it, the word encourage?
Yeah.
The derivation of it being in courage, like having to put myself inside courage. So when I'm encouraging you, I'm getting you to take that courage and be responsible. I wonder when you reflect back over your career, so when you look at from a work perspective, maybe even from a personal perspective, do you notice people take responsibility well, or do more people like avoid responsibility? What did you observe within the corporate? Because I've seen a really mixed bag in my
It is an
work.
absolute mix. It's an absolute mix. Some people come with the courage and the self-awareness and the clarity of their ambitions and the results that they want to have and the impact that they want to have. For them, this journey is relatively easy. And it's always a fast journey also. So most people that come with this usually also progress very fast.
Mm.
And then there's, everything on that entire spectrum up to people who live in complete denial and in a victim mode. And for them, it's going to be a very, very long and very hard journey. There's absolutely everything. But they're easy to spot, aren't they? The people, at least, that, have, all the required fundamentals in courage and realism and taking responsibility, in having focus, they're super easy to spot. You see them the day they join, the first time they speak in a meeting is when you get a good indication of that already.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because equally those without those three, those who live in stories, those who don't have as much courage, those who aren't used to owning things and taking responsibility, I think in the same way, when they talk at meetings, you see them come up. I mean, I think stories come up a lot in meetings.
Yeah, of course they come up a lot. Of course they come up a lot.
I can't believe he's come and given us that again.
Yeah.
Even in interactions, I think when you look for examples of how maybe as leaders we can help people, I think we need to look for the signs. So what are the signs of someone who isn't sitting in courage? Or what are the signs for someone who's not being realistic and living in a story? What are the signs for people who aren't taking responsibility? Because I know if I think of the realism piece and I think of people who live in stories, you'll hear the same thing over and over again. And it doesn't matter what is the external factor, the story will be exactly the same. The reasons why it's not happening, the reason why it's not working, the reason why it didn't get done, there's always a story. And normally, for me, that's the first sign of, I need to kind of laser focus the conversation to remove the story from their belief system. Otherwise, they get stuck in like a loop.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it's important to watch out for these signs more in the macro, not in the micro. So if, I don't know, if I'm supposed to give you a report, but all the time, tomorrow, and all the time the database was completely down, I could not get data. That's a pretty valid excuse, because I really physically could not, that's a judgment in the micro that you would make maybe about me, but that would be not fair. But if in the macro there's this general sentiment of that I can't do the things that I'm here to do, and you figure out, actually it's just someone who has a problem with accountability, and they just try to find reasons for blaming others, you'll see that in the macro, but you need to observe it for a little bit. I don't think you can judge someone by, an action like what I said is in the micro.
If 4 weeks running,
mm-hmm.
the reason why you don't produce reports is because it's always the database's fault, then we've got a problem and we're going to have a crucial conversation.
Yeah, probably.
But I think, you know, it goes down again. We've kind of referenced it a little bit before, where, you know, I think when it's a one-off, it's we call it a content issue.
Mm-hmm.
I observe it. I might say to you, hey, Frank, what happened? You said the report would be in this morning. Oh, Brad, database was down. I couldn't collect the data. It's going to be up on Monday. Don't worry, you'll have it Monday lunchtime. And I'm like, okay, listen, let me know earlier next time, right? Because I was planning to have that in today. I give you a little bit of feedback. I have to acknowledge it. But like you say, it's totally valid. So it's a content issue. No big deal. It's when it happens more than once and we start to form a pattern. And as soon as the pattern forms, something happens behaviorally and psychologically. I start to tell myself a new story about you.
Yeah, yeah, true.
Right? That Frank doesn't take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That Frank isn't doing what he's saying he's going to do. So he doesn't lead by example and he's not reliable. And I start telling myself this whole story. So I move myself out of realism into my sort of living in my story because of the pattern you're creating. And this is this kind of nuanced way we communicate in teams as human beings, that your actions and behavior impact the way I think about you. Yeah. And you know, the first time we hear stories is when we're sitting, you know, in the crib when we're a couple of weeks old, and our parents and grandparents, they start to tell us stories. Yeah. Human beings are designed to listen and believe in stories.
Yeah, yeah. We need a particular image of the world that has some fixed points. It helps us for orientation. I think it's impossible to process all the data that's around you and information around you in enough depth so you make this kind of assumption. You're just going to say, Frank seems to have an accountability problem. And that's a story that you start to tell yourself. While in some cases it may be true, but the thing is, as a leader, if Frank has an accountability problem, that is actually your problem. And that is something that you need to take accountability for to help fix that problem, right? You can't just say it's not my fault that, you know, our data in our analysis is never great because Frank never gives me good reports, or they come too late, so it's his fault. You know, you would be doing the same thing. No, as a leader, everything's your fault. Everything, unless, you know, until the moment you actually take responsibility for it and have the courage to address it.
And actually what you highlight there for me is like the fourth super skill of the leader in this little scenario we're talking through today, because you need that courage, you need that responsibility, you need the realism, but you need to know how to get the timing right. Because like you say, there may be just a one-off, it could be a content thing, mm-hmm. But if you're not speedy, if you don't cut right to the point of what's going on and deal with it in that moment, you can lose crucial time on deals, you can lose crucial time on projects. And I know that most of us learn from failing. Yeah. So I've learned some of my best lessons when I lost out on, you know, development programs. Maybe I was pitching to a business. But when I'm talking to my sales guys, I say to them, listen, learn and lose deals. Of course, that's going to happen, but do it quickly and right at the beginning of the quarter, because we don't want to be losing big deals regularly just to learn lessons. So I think there's that need for leaders to not just have courage to help people with realism and to help accountability and responsibility. They need to be able to, with a laser focus, get to the real hub of what's going on, which means they need to have speed. They need to be able to come straight in and say, hey, Frank, we're losing time here. Yeah. How do we refocus? How do we reshift? How do we reshape it? maybe it even reflects to that leader shift we talked back a few months ago. We need to shift the pace of how someone is working with our own pace, in not leaving it for 3 months before we bring it up at a performance review.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I clearly remember that for all of these 4 components, realism, courage, the speed, and the responsibility, I had to learn my own lessons. And through failure, through not doing the things right, through, I don't know, feeling inconvenienced with certain conversations and so on. And but these are just things that just life teach you. Now I know better. But it's absolutely important to do things right away, because, and not only for the reason that you mentioned. Of course, if you don't do this right, somehow the business suffers from it. But it's also for yourself.
Go on.
Because you know deep inside that you're carrying a weight of a problem and you're not looking it in the eye. And that is actually a stressful thing for you. And I mean stress in that it's actually, you're going to lose sleep over this.
Because you know you've got to say something and you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And you just make it worse by letting time pass. It's so much easier doing things right away. You just think it's hard, but it's not. The hard part is if you don't do it. You know, if you let it drag on, that's when it becomes hard.
And Frank, if we walk that example through that you've given, which I think is spot on, what you're showing to everyone who's listening to this is that these 4 qualities, courage, responsibility, realism, and speed, has to start with the self. Because in the moment when we start not confronting something, we're not having courage, we're not taking responsibility for our part in that process, we're definitely avoiding the confrontation of doing it quickly, and we're telling ourselves a story about why we're not doing it. So we're justifying to ourselves with a bit of cognitive dissonance why we're not doing it. Oh, well, you know, it's the end of the quarter. Frank's got a lot on his plate. He needs to bring this deal in. I'll talk to him at the beginning of next quarter when things are a bit calmer. And it's actually a perfectly valid reason. But the impact negatively on me now for the next 5 weeks, whilst I don't confront this challenge that's playing out in front of us, means I'm adopting in the most negative way these 4 qualities that I should be like doing in a positive manner. Yeah. I think it's so interesting, isn't it, that it just proves how with all forms of leadership, if you don't start with the self, you can't project it onto others.
No, you cannot. And though I understand why starting to do these things, if you're not great at it yet, feels uncomfortable. You don't want to go where it's uncomfortable. That's what your instinct is always telling you. Now, I think what works for me, but maybe it also works for other people, is you need to justify to yourself, or you should, I think, justify to yourself that you are going to do these uncomfortable things because you're actually going to help someone with it. If you look at it this way, I think you can find, more courage to doing the things that are uncomfortable if you have it justified by this action is actually going to help someone. You make it about someone else if you're actually afraid for yourself.
So you almost create a new story that you're serving others.
Yeah.
You take the responsibility for that, which gives you the courage to take the speedy action. So you see, even in your explanation there, which I totally buy into, by the way, you're showing again how these 4 elements are not just independent of each other. They are interdependent of each other.
Precisely. And actually, I think that's a full circle thing. Do you remember that in the beginning we said that you have the liberty to rewrite your own story, meaning the story in your head? That's exactly what you would be doing. You spotted it well. That's exactly what I have been doing with this.
people do it. Look, we both run our own business. And I think when you do that, you have to show courage. You have to act with speed, because if you don't, you're not going to be eating. Because if you don't make that call to a client, or you don't find out if it's a yes or a no, you don't get an invoice out. So that can create trouble long term. So you have to take responsibility, and you have to tell yourself a story. And I tell myself a story. I heard myself saying it to the kids the other day. We were talking about work. And they said to me, why do you work so hard? Was the question they asked.
Yeah.
First of all, I was really pleased that they recognized that I worked hard, because that's a really good starting point for their work ethic. But I heard myself saying to them that, well, I'm mad because I gave up working 40 hours a week so I could work 90. I mean, that's...
Right. That's funny, yeah.
And that's the story I tell myself, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I know when setting up a business and trying to build it, there's always something to do. And maybe the balance, the work-life balance, goes off a little bit center, because we tell ourselves a story. We're needed. We're the only ones who can write the proposal. We're the only ones who can attend the meeting. And all of these things, I'm wondering, you know, as I think about these like super skills, maybe you're right when you say it's about responsibility. It's about a deep self-awareness, and then a responsibility to say, do you know what? I'm not going to tell myself that story. That is a story.
Yeah.
I am going to have the courage to say that today. Actually, now is the moment. There's never a good moment to give bad news.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And here's one other thing that I would like to add, actually. I don't judge anyone's story. I really don't. But I would like to ask people, is your story helping yourself? How is your story helping you? If you're happy with your story, that's good, go ahead. But if you're not happy with your story, it's time to rewrite it. I think that's really the main question. I don't want, to be honest, maybe people will be judging the story I'm telling myself. And that's fine, but I'm happy with my story. I don't regret it. But the moment, I tell you, the moment I would not feel any longer that the story that I'm telling myself is helping me, if it starts to make me unhappy and so on, I would love to hear it from someone.
Oh, Frank, you know, I give you my word that if ever you're telling a story and I sense there's a misalignment of your core values, I'll hold a mirror up to you straight away and say, hey, is that the story you're telling?
Deal.
But you know, just when you were saying that, you reminded me of an old friend. I mean, a really old friend going back 20 years. And we're not in touch so much now. But I know from other people in my social circle that he's still telling the same story. And you know, 20 years ago, we used to always get together on a Friday night for a boys' drink. And we'd watch some rubbish movie or something, you know, like Van Damme or something,
Yeah.
to watch some kickboxing.
Good times.
Right, while we had a couple of beers. And it was always the same thing on a Friday. He would come and he would complain about his manager. And I remember after 4 or 5 years, he was quite senior in an accountancy firm. And I remember saying to him, hey, listen, you know, you've got a choice, right? You keep telling this story about it, but you don't leave. So you hate your job, you hate your boss, you hate the commute, you hate the people in your office. Why are you there? I didn't talk in this language of stories and things like that then, right? But why are you still there? And he was like, well, you know, the salary. Well, Frank, he's now a senior partner in this company. And I heard just a few weeks ago, a friend of mine was at a barbecue and told me, oh, I saw, you know, so-and-so. He still hates his boss. He still hates his job. He still hates all the other people in the office. But he can't leave because if he left, he'd lose a 6-figure salary, plus bonus, plus his car. And he doesn't want to do that. So I'm thinking, when I was listening to that story, I'm sharing it now because maybe when we tell ourselves a story, it's because it serves our purpose.
Yes, exactly.
So your point about, are you happy with your story? This is a brilliant question to ask people, because actually he is happy with his story.
Yeah, it seems so.
Because 25 years later, he's still there.
Yeah.
And if you're not happy, you've got a choice. You've always got a choice. These super skills that we're talking about, speed, courage, responsibility, and realism, do you think that some of us are like stronger in some and maybe weaker in others? Do you feel maybe we need to work more on some than on others?
I'm convinced, actually, that that's the case. But I do think that, you know, actual development work on one of the four is also dragging the other ones along a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're so connected, you see.
Mm.
But I do think that it may make complete sense. You might have a particular strength. I like to rather think in strengths. You have a set of weaknesses and, you know, characteristics that are not so developed, but you always get the highest impact if you invest more in your strengths. But, you know, like 80%, but take the 20% of the work into having an honest look at where you're maybe not so good at, and go develop this a little bit. It's fine tuning, I would say.
Yeah. That's why I look at them as super skills.
Yeah.
Because I only want to look at them as a positive.
Right.
But I know that my natural style, my natural approach, particularly when I'm under pressure, will lean into two of them quicker. So for me, speed and courage, I lean into very, very quickly, especially when under stress.
Yeah.
And I need to be more mindful of the stories I'm telling myself and focusing on tangible outcomes more than getting caught up in the story.
Right.
When I'm under stress, realism and responsibility start diminishing, and speed and courage become more excessive. And
Right.
it's about finding that natural balance.
But look, Matt, I mean, if your current mix of skills among the four works for you, then maybe that's good enough.
Mm.
You know, unless you run into actual problems with something, I think that's probably good enough. Right? So I don't know if we can actually seek perfectionism and all of these things and models that are out there. Probably not, right? So, but if your skills around this, they work for you, they don't create problems, at least not big ones, something that should be on your priority list to address, then I think you're good, aren't you? I mean, let's get to the point where we're good enough first, and then from there, we can fine tune.
I like your idea of fine-tuning rather than seeking perfection. Let's seek excellence rather than perfection.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, right.
That way we fine-tune and move the dial a little bit. Frank, I think we've come full circle on that topic.
Yeah, that's right. Once again.
I love it. I'll see you next time on Real Talk.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Bye-bye, Brad. Bye.
Bye.